Well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone, for our first town hall discussion with District 1 City Council candidate Christine Margiotta to exchange ideas and discuss issues related to our city's fiscal health and future. I'm really thrilled that over 50 of you have registered to join us tonight. This is really exciting. We've all been looking very much forward to this evening, and I, for one, am super thrilled to be a part of this. My name is Phalana Tiller, and I'll be serving as your moderator tonight. I'm also proud to be a co-chair of Christine's campaign. Behind the scenes today are my co-chair, Sorrel Steelstra, and our committee member, Josue Barnes, and they'll be helping me to monitor the meeting and to assist us in making sure that we get to as many of your questions as possible. Before we begin, I'd just like to review a few details about our meeting structure tonight. Firstly, the meeting's being recorded, and we're doing this so that it can be rebroadcast at a later date so that more community members can learn about Christine and ask future questions in the event that they weren't able to join us tonight. Our format is designed as kind of a webinar in the sense that we want to first give Christine an opportunity to present some of her prepared thoughts, and then to respond to a few questions that I have prepared for her that are based on some of the most frequent questions that we get from community members. And then after that, we'll open up the floor to your live questions. As we begin, your audio is muted just to give us a chance to get through the prepared part of the evening. And then obviously after that, your mics will be unmuted. Throughout the session, please submit your questions using the chat function. We'll be collecting those and sorting them, and then I'll read through those questions and read them out loud to everyone in the second half of our meeting so that Christine can answer those questions. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Christine Margiotta. She and I have only worked together for a short while, and upon learning of Christine's candidacy and talking to her about her incredibly rich work history and seeing her very measured but incredibly exciting vision for Claremont, I was fully on board to work to help get her elected. My own perspective as the director of learning at a local social enterprise that's charged with thinking about how to strengthen organizations in order to strengthen society has given me a great confidence in Christine as an experienced systems thinker. And I think she's really well prepared for the role that she seeks to fill as a Claremont City Council member. Some of you may already know that Christine grew up in Claremont. She attended our local schools and graduated from Scripps College. She's also a parent, and so like many of you, she's been tackling the incredibly complex terrain of parenting, working, schooling, and now campaigning in the context of a global health crisis. So I bow down to all of you folks who are having to do that right now. Christine is also currently the Executive Director of Social Venture Partners Los Angeles. She's the chair of the LA County Measure H Citizens Oversight Advisory Board and has volunteered with and advised Claremont Change, Sustainable Claremont, CHIRP, and our local elementary schools. Thank you and welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much, Phalana. I'm so grateful for your partnership on this campaign. Grateful to you and Sorrel for your co-chairship, and everyone on our committee for everything you're pouring into this campaign. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, taking time out of your Monday to join us for this conversation. So for those of you who I'm meeting for the first time tonight, I'll share a bit about my background. As Phalana mentioned, I grew up here in Claremont, and my wife Becky and I have been so happy to make this the place where we're raising our kids and where we plan to grow old together. I've spent the last 20 years working to strengthen our regional communities, tackling issues like homelessness, mental health, economic and racial justice across LA County, which of course includes our city of Claremont. And when this pandemic began 5 months ago, I was so aware of how it was impacting our residents. Becky and I struggling to school our kids while working full-time, friends losing their jobs, older adults struggling with living alone, friends battling COVID, and countless friends and family members challenged with the anxiety, loneliness, and economic uncertainty of these times. I watched as our city responded, and I realized that I had something to offer, particularly in this time. My background is in social work, which is a discipline that enables me to both meet the challenges at the individual level and craft solutions at the community level. One of the primary places that we care for our community in this moment and beyond is through our city's budget. And that's one piece of this work that I am most passionate about. So I used to think that city budgets were something wonky or abstract. But over the years, I've realized that a budget is the literal expression of what we value as a community. A budget is a moral document that expresses who and what we care most about. It's how we care for our seniors, our youth, our unhoused community, our environment, our ability to attract and support healthy businesses, and so much more. I know from many conversations with you all over the past few weeks that this is of concern to many of you, and that's why we decided to focus on this topic for our first town hall. So I'm really excited to talk more about this tonight and to hear from you what you believe our budget should say about us.
Thank you, Christine. I'd like to get started with my questions now. So one of the central concerns for many Claremonters is the current budget, obviously, and that's why we decided to talk about it tonight. But I'd like to know about how your specific experience and skills have prepared you to help us tackle this issue.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I am no stranger to a budget crisis. So I've spent much of my career working on the issue of homelessness and actually launched a large-scale campaign to end homelessness across LA County just as the economic downturn was beginning back in 2008. So I started by bringing together a diverse group of leaders across the business sector, government, nonprofit, and philanthropy. We knew that the homeless crisis was urgent, and yet we knew there was no way that new revenue was on the table in that moment. So we began with a big vision. We talked about ending homelessness at a time when no one else was talking about that. And we recognized that we needed to make the most of every dollar that we had. We knew we needed to make our dollars go further, and we had to be creative and flexible. So in the 5 years that followed that, we ended homelessness for 35,000 people across this region. So 35,000 people moved off the streets and into permanent housing at a time when new resources were incredibly hard to come by. So we did that by bringing over $1 million in resources to the work. And we then passed two ballot measures to invest another $1 billion in this crisis because voters had co-created this vision of ending homelessness. They had seen that it could work, and then they were ready to put the dollars on the table to actually make that happen. So that's the kind of vision and process that I feel excited to bring to our community. I want to create a budget process in our community that captures our collective vision for what our community can be. What do we need? What do we most value? Where do we want to invest the precious and limited tax dollars that we have? So I want to understand how our community would answer those questions and crunch the numbers with our city team. From there, we can not only make tough decisions about our existing budget, but we can also build the will in our community for a new revenue measure. I'm committed to bringing new revenue to Claremont. Measure CR, our local sales tax, lost by 141 votes, not even a full percentage point. So to revisit an idea like this again with our voters, I believe that we need to build that collective vision of what we want for the future of Claremont. What are the services and supports that'll really enable our community to thrive? We can build on some of our existing budgeting traditions by not only asking for input on budgeting decisions, but starting the process sooner and taking on a full analysis of the gaps in care and services in our community, and then also co-creating with our residents a vision of what we'd like to see. We then look closely at how far our existing dollars can get us, and then turn to our community to get the rest of the way to that vision.
So Christina, I'd love to follow up. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. I'd just like to follow up with a quick question related to part of what you said in your answer to that first question. And that's around the idea of having experience in Los Angeles County regionally and having had the particular experience of moving people to kind of develop the will to tax themselves. And I'm curious to know, if there are any insights that you have or ideas that you envision about how to go about that conversation of building will, building a taste for something, capacity, a capacity to do a thing that doesn't necessarily always feel that great to do. What are some thoughts, if you could elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like the first step is really co-creating that shared vision. What is it that we want to create together, and building our belief and resolve that it's possible. So when we started that work to end homelessness, no one was using the language of ending homelessness. We might talk about reducing homelessness or reducing suffering, but no one was actually talking about ending it. And it wasn't until we started to show that it was possible, to show that there is actually a very simple solution to the issue, and one that with some investment of both financial and human resources that we could very well solve. So I really believe that it is those two pieces. It's setting the shared vision of where we're headed together and then showing ourselves that it's possible to get there. That's when we started to see the collective will really grow. And we won both of those ballot measures by a landslide. We needed a 2/3 majority in both the city of Los Angeles and then throughout the whole county. And we were able to do that easily because the community had seen that an investment in this resource worked. And it was something that everyone wanted. We all wanted to see an end to homelessness, and we knew what it would take to get there.
Thank you for humoring me with, with the riffing right there. Appreciate it. My next prepared question for you is, it's clear that one of your strengths is managing large government and philanthropic budgets, but you've also said that you possess a proven ability to build bridges across partisan divides and have a history of engaging with public and private stakeholders. Please tell us about a specific instance where you've worked or you continue to work across sectors and political divides, and then what that might mean for how you intend to work for the city of Claremont.
Great. So this is one of my favorite things to do in community, is to think about what are the gifts that each of us bring to this work and how can we each deploy our strengths to the best end possible. So when it comes to budgets, I feel very comfortable with large public and private budgets. I currently lead a nonprofit, as you mentioned, and over the last 4 years, I've been able to double our budget. But not only to do that, but to do that in a way that is sustainable and diversified so that we have a steady foundation to stand on, especially as we enter this crisis. When I was working for United Way, I managed a budget of $250 million. That was a blend of both private and public dollars. And now as the chair of the County Measure H Oversight Board, I oversee the implementation of over $600 million in Measure H funding throughout the county. And my role is really about ensuring that these new taxpayer dollars are spent to the greatest impact possible for our communities. So all of this is only possible through bringing people together around the kind of shared vision that I was talking about, both across sectors, but also across the political spectrum. So I've had the opportunity to work with the Chamber of Commerce, with labor unions, with government entities throughout the region, foundations, nonprofits, faith groups. And when we're able to link arms around shared purpose, the good of our community, those differences make us stronger. There are superpowers. And when we're able to leverage those differences, we're unstoppable. So that's the skill set and the energy that I want to bring to our community. I really believe that to get through this crisis, we need to spend our local dollars wisely and bring in new revenue. But we also have other resources that we're leaving on the table. We can leverage funding from throughout the region, the state, the country by creating partnerships across the region with foundations and other government entities who would be eager to partner with us to make our dollars go further. So just a quick example of this, back in 2011, I started something called a Funders Collaborative, where we had $1 million in seed philanthropic resources. We invited philanthropic and government partners to the table. We set a shared vision for what we wanted to accomplish together. And together we turned $1 million into $105 million in the first year. That grew to 200 million in the second year, 250 million in the third year. So it's, again, that experience of setting a shared vision and bringing us together around the table to say, what can we do together that is stronger than what we can do separately? And related to that, some community members have asked me why we haven't seen more Measure H dollars here in Claremont. And these are the funds throughout the county through the countywide sales tax to end homelessness. And part of what enables us to leverage those regional dollars is our community investing in our local nonprofits. So it's not until we invest our local dollars that our regional partners see us investing in our own community, see us strengthening our infrastructure, that then we're able to draw in those regional dollars. So, those are some of the ways that I would want us to build partnerships, both across sectors and across our region. I think we can be so creative about inviting the whole community into this problem solving. We're such a creative and passionate community, and I'm eager to bring us together to problem solve together.
So as you probably know, and you can probably be counted among the many residents of Claremont who are avid supporters and consumers of our city's various recreational, educational, and human services offerings, particularly those for youth and seniors. Well, a lot of us are interested to know what are some specific ways that you intend to support the city's ability to provide those communal benefits and resources?
Right. Yeah, those are certainly some of the most critical parts of our budget. And through our city's budget crisis, we've unfortunately cut many of those services. So I mentioned earlier, I want to see us engage in a true community budgeting process where we take the time to engage our entire community in envisioning what the Claremont of our future can be. So I want to see us really dig in and collect quantitative data on the gaps in services to meet our community's needs, to listen to our residents on what we envision for the future. So I see a process that doesn't just begin when our budget process starts, but that's really a much more in-depth and robust process to listen deeply, both to the needs of our residents and also what the concrete data tells us that we most need. So I want to understand what services we most value and ensure that we have a budget that invests in our communities, our seniors, our youth, our families, our businesses, our unhoused neighbors. So each year we dedicate general fund dollars to our Human Services Department. And this year we cut our city's Human Services general funds by 13%. So the amount of general services dollars that we invested in human services was decreased 13%. And we had tough choices to make this year, no doubt about that. We had some really challenging decisions to make as a community, but we're in a moment where we need those services more than ever. So my commitment to Claremont is that we come together to make sure our services and supports are made whole, especially when we need them most, and that we both make the most of the resources we have and create a pathway to build that revenue over time.
One of the things I heard you say really in most of your answers tonight had to do with the idea of like mission setting and getting people attuned to the idea that they share a goal, whether they're coming to it from different sectors or different perspectives. And I just want to follow up on that a little bit before we open up the floor to the Q&A. And sort of my question for you is, one of my favorite things about the Claremont City Council campaigns is that they're typically nonpartisan, right? We don't talk about a person running under this party label or that party label. And what I love about that is it encourages the candidates to come to the table with their skills, their history, their experience, what strengths they offer and would contribute to our city's efforts, and then to talk about their vision and their ideas. And I'm not particularly asking you to like weigh in on party affiliation in that perspective, but can you talk a little bit about how, in a lot of ways, that is also kind of mirrors what you've described about mission setting, that that there's something in the way that we run the campaigns and seating the city council that really is actually kind of suited for and already attuned to approaching problem solving in the same way. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because I've thought a lot about the nonpartisan nature of this local campaign, and I really appreciate the way that allows us to focus on our values, to focus on collective problem solving. And that's really what I appreciate about local government, is that we're able to come together across the political spectrum, across our identities, our sectors, to say, what is it that we need to do here and how can we come together to get it done? And that's really been what the last 20 years of my career has been about, is building bridges across community. I think I've worked on many issues over time. I've spoken quite a bit about my work in homelessness tonight, because that's where I spent about a decade of my career. But that is an issue that is very much bipartisan. And we often talked about how our motivations for being around the table were sometimes different. We were each there for different reasons, with different interests in mind, but we all had the same goal. No one around the table could disagree that we wanted to ensure that we lived in a community where no one was sleeping on our streets. And so that's what matters most to me, is that we can come together as a Claremont community, both as we think about how will we get through this crisis, where will we focus our time and our resources, and what's the path that we want to set for the future together.
We have a few questions that are starting to float in. And so I'm going to say thank you very much, Christine. And I'm going to kind of pivot our attention to the live Q&A session. This is going to ask you all to be a little bit patient with me, everyone, because what that means is now we have to do a little bit of sorting of your questions and actually reading them to make sure we represent them accurately. So just a moment while we get through all of that, please. Okay, our first question is that, I'm not sure who this comes from, but the question is, there are a number of proposed housing developments in Claremont. How will you ensure the developer maintains community involvement through the process? I'm concerned about having another Colby Circle disaster, which has been 14 years in the making, and the owner developer hasn't addressed ongoing neighbors' concerns. So it's a little specific question that's sort of obviously adjacent to budget issues, but one that's on the minds clearly of at least one of our guests tonight. If you have any thoughts about that, Christine.
Great, thank you, Phalana. And this is certainly, as we're talking about housing and homelessness, this is certainly a central piece of that process. And the community engagement process in any new development is critical. So having worked on homelessness and housing for much of my career, I hold as centrally important to that process the voice and role of community in voicing what they want to see in local developments. So I will absolutely ensure a process that brings in the voices of community members, and that we create a space for real dialogue. I often find in situations like that, there can be a one-sided conversation in public meetings. And I believe strongly in real dialogue, especially when it comes to change in our community. You know, change is hard and can be scary for folks. And I think it's important that we talk about what it is that we all want for our community and how it is we'll get there. So I am a big believer in that community input process and creating the strongest outcomes possible, and a community that feels great about the outcome at the end of the day.
Thank you, Christine. Just sorting again through the next question. We have a question from Amanda Dyer, who wants to know, how will you ensure the health of seniors in the time of COVID? How would you work to support our town's ability to care for seniors, particularly given a health crisis like the one we're in right now?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Amanda. This is incredibly important to me. I think about my dad passed away about 6 months ago. My mom is on the call tonight, and I think a lot about her quality of life and the quality of life in seniors across Claremont. So I'm aware of not only the health needs for our seniors in our community, but also the social and emotional needs. So I think certainly the budget is a central place for us to look at that. When we look at our human services budget, how are we ensuring that we are supporting the seniors in our community through our services? How are we pivoting those services? I know, Phalana, you were delivering meals to seniors just this afternoon. So I've seen our city making that pivot. But how are we also really listening to what our residents need and how those needs are shifting in this time? I'm also thinking about the public health needs. I know I've heard from seniors across the community that they're feeling uncomfortable and scared to leave their home because not everyone is wearing a mask when they go out. So I'm appreciative of that conversation recently at our city council meetings as we talk about how can we ensure that each of us are taking care of one another by wearing a mask when we're out in public, and being mindful of the health needs across our community, particularly for our seniors. So those are some of the places where I think about where that value comes to life as we talk about our budget as an expression of our values. I think about the actual investment of dollars in our human services budget and how important that is to me, that we ensure we're investing in our human services, and within that budget that we're investing in supports for our seniors, that we're thinking about how we pivot those services and respond to this moment, and that we also think about policy more broadly and how, you know, policies like a mask ordinance or other supports can also support our health needs.
Thank you, Christine. You have a question from Philip Hofer, who would like to know if you have any concerns about present decisions from the sitting council in terms of budget cuts. Have you had some time to kind of, you know, form an opinion about anything that that either concerns you or that that you'd like to reflect on in any way?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I watched our budget process very closely this year, and this was a big motivator for me to step into this race. I care a lot about our budget. I've often spoken with folks about how fiscal responsibility should be something that we all embrace, especially with a relatively small budget. You know, we have $26 million in our general fund. We can be really thoughtful as a community about how we spend those resources. So as I mentioned earlier, I was concerned about the significant cuts to our human services budget. I know that our council had tough decisions to make, but it did concern me that we made a 13% decrease in the general funds that were committed to human services. So that I weighed in as a resident throughout that process, and also decided to step into this race in part because of that, because I want to see a true investment in solving the root of many of the problems in our community. That's deeply important to me, and I believe much of that can be found in our human services budget, in how we address substance abuse, how we address homelessness, how we address mental health in our community. So many of the other crisis supports, like what our law enforcement are responding to, so much of what they're responding to are those crisis needs that we can solve more effectively and permanently through a human services budget.
One of the themes in tonight's conversation, Christine, as you know, because you decided on it, was around resilience, right? And I wanted to actually ask this question earlier, but I'd like to come back around to this notion of the word resilience and how that ties into the idea of, you know, systems thinking and root cause examination, and how we sort of consider mindful leadership and growth as a city. Can you talk a little bit about the concept of resilience and how that's related to what you're saying in terms of human services approaches to some issues?
Yeah, I appreciate that word, and I think about how relevant that is in a time like this, in how we think about our community's resilience as we not only weather this crisis, but as we really think about the pathway for the future. So when I think about resilience, I think about, you know, you mentioned the term root cause. You know, I think about this ability to ask the question, why is that happening? So when we see a challenge in our community, you know, certainly we respond to the immediate need, but a healthy and resilient community is asking itself the question of, why is this occurring? And why are we seeing this again and again and again? And what can we do to get to the root of it? So while I appreciate that in many cases we're responding to the crises of people out on our streets, or our youth struggling with mental health challenges, or the health of our seniors, I also think it's so important for the long term that we ask ourselves, what is it that we can invest in now that will set that foundation for the long term and build the resiliency, not only of our individual residents, but of us as a collective, as a community.
Thank you. We have a question from Claudia, who would like to know what you think about whether the changed makeup of city council, I guess the district, that change, the districting change, whether that will, with council members representing specific districts, might that make it harder to bring the city together to fight NIMBYism, not in my backyard-ism? Have you thought about that at all? And do you think that this shift in the way that the council is composed will get in the way of some of that?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And I actually, one of the things I really appreciate about this district approach is that it allows us to have even deeper conversations with community. So I'm aware that District 1 is about 7,000 residents across the city of Claremont. And the decisions that I would make on council are for our entire city. So I think a lot about that balance, about how I listen deeply to the constituents of this district and also have in mind the broader community and what's best for Claremont as a whole. So when I think about a dynamic like NIMBYism, where, you know, from my experience, that's typically residents feeling afraid of what's to come. So when we think about affordable housing, supportive housing for low-income folks or folks who are unhoused, that can bring up fears and stereotypes for many of us. We think about who those people are who are moving into our community, and you know, I think fears come up, and that's where this ability as district leaders to connect with our constituents, you know, I feel very capable of connecting with 7,000 residents. And, you know, we've talked about over the next couple months, it is my intention to talk to every single person in this district so that they know when they're concerned about something like that, a new housing development, they can talk to me, they can talk to each other. We can build spaces for conversation at the hyper-local level now in this district structure that can then serve us as a broader community. So I see that, and I imagine part of what may be behind that question is you might be thinking then that if there's a new development in one district, that then the rest of the community might not engage in that. But we're a small enough community that I think the entire community can engage in those conversations, but we can also create the very local dialogue as well.
I feel like I hear some echoes and parallels to kind of the earliest part of our conversations around how your history and your professional experience was centered, you know, across the region of LA County, of which Claremont is a part, right? You're working regionally, but ultimately that we are somewhat represented in that work when someone works regionally in LA County. And not unlike if someone sits on a city council, they might represent a particular district, but they are within a city, right? And we are all networked in the sense that if, you know, even if you aren't necessarily, you know, immediately touched by the thing because it's not right outside your own front door, it is part of what we will all collectively experience as part of a small town and region.
Absolutely.
We have one more question, and everyone don't be shy. Please feel free to send your questions in, and you can send them to me or to Sorrel, who should be on your list of people that you can send questions to. Our next question came in earlier, a couple days ago or earlier today from our Instagram account. Someone wants to know, how do we improve mental health services offered through the city? I don't know if you've had any time to think about that, Christine, but if you do have any thoughts, I'd be interested to know what your response is.
Yeah, I appreciate this question, and I know we've spoken about this this human services budget throughout the evening, and I think about the resources we have in this community through Tri-City Mental Health. We do have strong providers of mental health services in the region, and so much of this is about investing in those services. One of my first jobs when I was early in my social work career was providing therapy for teenagers. And I've shared with folks that I was actually connected with them because they were court mandated to come see me. And that to me was such a tragedy of the way our mental health system is structured, and the way our systems more broadly are structured, is that they were coming to me as a punishment. And that is rarely rarely a helpful setting to facilitate someone opening up to you. If you are their punishment, it is unlikely they're going to want to confide in what's actually going on. So they were coming to me typically because they were caught with drugs or alcohol on their high school campus. But what was actually going on was a much deeper set of challenges that were going on in their personal life, in their home life, in their school and social life. And we're not catching those challenges soon enough. We're catching them in a punitive manner when there's a behavior that is disruptive to the environment. But how are we proactively offering mental health supports, both destigmatizing those supports, but also creating a robust enough infrastructure of supports that anyone in our community can access them before they're in crisis and before there is that greater disruption to their life, to their community's life.
We have another question for you, Christine. This comes from David Mann. He wants to know whether you, as a graduate of Scripps College, have any visions for how the vast resourcefulness of the, I'll say 7 Cs, David said 5, but 7 Cs, could be drawn upon in collaboration with the issues of Claremont.
Yeah, thank you for that question, David. I feel like I'm in such a unique position, having been a child in Claremont, having been a college student in Claremont, and now a parent. So my time at Scripps was some of the best years of my life, and being immersed in that community was incredible. And what I've shared is that it often felt like we were in a bit of a bubble that was separate from the rest of the city. I didn't know what was happening in local government much of the time. I didn't feel like we were engaged in those conversations. And there was incredible wealth of brilliance and insight and life experience with both students and faculty and staff across those campuses. So I feel very eager to build stronger conversations and collaboration between, and it implies that they're not part of our city. So, between folks who work at the colleges and make the colleges their home and their life, and the broader community. I feel that is a great resource that we could much more tap into as we think about, we talk about problem solving and thinking about our community's greatest challenges, and that is also top of mind for our colleges. So how can we ensure that thinking, that research, those conversations can also be focused here in our community, and that we can create dialogue, not just within the colleges or within the city, but across. So I would see that community as a central sector almost, that we engage in these cross-sector conversations.
I know that we've had conversations before, Christine, where you've described the relationship as one that you see as very symbiotic, right? Many of us have moved to Claremont because of our jobs at the colleges, and it's one of the largest employers in the city, and sort of in a sense, when you've encountered the conversation about town and gown as things that are separate, you haven't seen them that way. You see them as part of the same kind of ecosystem that ought to be taking care of each other, because ultimately they're part of a shared whole that's unique. The city isn't great without the colleges, and the colleges aren't really great without the city. Mm-hmm. So I've always really appreciate that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
We do have another question for you. This comes, another question from Amanda Dyer, who'd like to know if you have any thoughts about protecting LGBT programs and or LGBT youth within the city budget. Is that something that you've had time to kind of think through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as someone who came out in this community as a young person, and now returning to Claremont a few years back as a 2-mom family, this is something that I'm very much aware of, and I think about all of the services and supports in our community, and how that applies to our LGBT community here in Claremont. I think about this when it comes to our young people in particular. We have a child who's had some challenges in our school system as he navigates being a child of two moms, and as he is a creative kid with very unique and wonderful expression. So I think about how we can proactively, honestly, I think about the narrative that we create. So this shifts away, certainly through our budget. I think I've spoken plenty about our budget and how our budget can and should take care of our people. So that should be a given here. But also the narrative we create about who we are as a community, and the inclusivity and the equity that we want within our community for everyone who lives here. So that's, that feels like a key piece for me, where growing up here in Claremont, I didn't see myself reflected in this community as a queer woman. I didn't hear conversations about LGBT people, and I would very much want to increase and improve that representation, not only for queer young folks, but for many groups of people who feel like they maybe aren't represented or seen in our community.
Thank you. We have a question from Ray Rotman. Ray would like to know how you plan to address or maybe interact with or work with the element in our community that maybe leans towards smaller government and or smaller revenue streams for the city. So have you had any thoughts about, what it means to work with people who might have a different perspective about the role of governance in the city?
Sure. And thank you, Ray. It's good to hear from you. I think about with this that it really feels like that's a moment to step back and look big picture, and to say, because I think about this on any issue that we work on, it's really about saying, well, what are we trying to create here? So the small government, large government, small budget, small revenue, large revenue, those are all tactics. Those are means to an end. So what is it we're trying to create here? And how do we agree on that first? Because that's, ironically, usually that bigger picture is something we can arrive on together. But if we don't answer that question first, what's the problem we're solving for? And what's our vision to make it stronger? That then guides the tactics. So certainly when it comes to smaller revenue, I would say we are on a tight budget as a city. And I think it's important that we maximize every dollar we have. It's not to say that the first step is new revenue. The first step is looking at how we make the best use of the resources we have. And it is only when we're clear that our resources don't meet the needs that we have as a community that then we take the step for new revenue. But I'll say, in work that I've done to grow revenue in government systems over the years, that has very much been a bipartisan effort. I think about the Measure H and Measure HHH coalitions that we built that were across the Chamber of Commerce, across business, across labor, across faith groups, who I think typically would have said, I believe in smaller government, I believe in, smaller revenue. But it was with that shared understanding of, this is a problem we need to tackle, and this is the path to get us there. We've maximized every dollar we have, and we need to put more into it. So I think that's the step back that I would want to take in a conversation like that.
Thank you. We have another question here for you. This comes from David Lull. He'd like to know, he says that the effort to fund an improved Claremont police facilities has been repeatedly defeated. The proposals for Village South, La Puerta, Commons have also been controversial. The sales tax increase was defeated by a small margin. What connections, if any, do you see in these defeats, or what do you see going on in these defeats? How would you go about solving these issues? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, David. So, I think this is, again, an issue of not being clear enough as a community about what it is that we're solving for. So when we saw these two measures to improve our police facilities, There were very different numbers each time on the table in terms of what it would take to retrofit and improve our police department. So I think that's an important question of what's the problem that we're solving for here? What do we actually need in a new police department, and what are in the site itself, and what are the creative ways that we can solve for this as a community? So I think, the first time around we went right to a very sizable dollar figure, and then the second time we backed up on that a little bit. But I believe we can have a more in-depth and creative conversation about what it is that we need and how we can get there. So I may have missed the tail end of the question. I think there were a few questions wrapped up in one, but
it was a pretty compound question, but it essentially just saying, what lessons do you think you see in terms of like those defeated measures, and how might you go about, addressing what information that says about what our community has been either trying to tackle or solve for, or maybe has, has seen as of prime importance at the time that those were up.
Right. So I think, and I even think about, and David, I think that was another David that asked the 5C question, but I think about this question of bringing our community together around creative problem solving and problem definition, honestly, that again, I don't believe you create political and public will through a ballot measure. I believe you first build the collective will for what it is you're solving for, and then you place the ballot measure on the ballot. And I don't believe we've done that as well as we could have, both on the measures that you're referencing and on CR. I think there is a process that we now know that we need to engage in a deeper dialogue here to come to some agreement on the problems that we're solving for, on creative solutions to those problems, again, bringing in stakeholders across this community and bringing their ideas to the table. And then to say, okay, we're ready to make a decision on this, because in that process, then that public will is built. That's how we grow the will. I think, I remember back when we were voting on Prop 8, which I know is a bit of a non sequitur, but this was the ballot measure that was to take away our right to marry in the state of California before we had the right to marry in the state of California. And we made the brazen assumption that Californians were with us, and we just needed to make sure they went out and voted. And we were absolutely crushed on November 4th, 2008, when we realized that California was not with us on this issue. When Californians voted down or passed Prop 8 and voted down our right to marry, that was such a blow. And what happened immediately, maybe 2 or 3 days later, when we were able to pick ourselves back up again, is that we said, okay, we have some hearts and minds to change here. We have conversations to have. So we went out and we knocked on doors in conservative districts all across the state, and we told our stories, and we had deep conversations with people about who we are and what our lives are. And that's what shifted the paradigm. We did the hard work first. We had the hard conversations. And then we saw this groundswell, and there were many reasons that happened across the country, but I believe that's the foundation that was needed. And I think something similar has happened here on these measures, where we assumed the community was there already. And I think there is more legwork to be done. There are more conversations to be had, more doors to knock on, more tables to convene before we jump to the ballot box to make this decision.
We have another question. This comes from Rose Ash. What role do you see for reinvigorating the Claremont Committee on Human Relations in addressing greater inclusiveness and equity for residents, workers, and guests in our community? If you had any time to think about the Claremont Committee on Human Relations.
Yes, and hi Rose, it's good to see you. Well, I think as you know, and as we've talked about, inclusion and equity are deeply important to me. So I am very supportive, both of how we think about a committee, a revived committee, but also how do we carry out that vision throughout everything we do in this city? How are we thinking about representation and inclusivity and equity in every single commission, in every conversation, on our council, in our staff. How do we ensure that those values are baked into how we do business? Those are, I think, core parts of our identity as Claremont, and I think we could do more to operationalize those values in how they show up in our government systems and our processes, but also just in our community conversations. So I appreciate you raising those values, and want to just affirm my commitment to how we carry those out in this community.
We have a question from Meme Sugihara, who missed the earliest part of the evening. So this is a little bit of a repeat, but I just wanted to, in case someone else missed it as well, I want to ask it anyway and give you a chance to respond. She wants to know about some of your ideas for creating sustainable increase in city revenue. What are some of the things you've thought about, or some of the ways you'd go about learning what the city has a will for?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and hi, Meme. So we did talk about this a bit earlier in the evening, and happy to touch on it again. I do think this is something that we'll need to look closely at as a community. So as we've talked about, we have very recently tried to put forward a new revenue measure that was not successful, that did not pass by a very small margin. We're talking about the 141 votes differential. And I think, as I was using the example of Prop 8 or of any of our recent measures here in Claremont, I really do think it's a matter of our public will, and that we don't yet have that shared vision across this community for what it is that we need. So I think the first step is to again step way back and say, what is needed in this community? What are the needs? How does our existing budget meet those needs? And then where are the gaps? How do we first maximize every dollar that we have to go as far as it can? And then from there, where there are still gaps, how do we talk about that as a community and really engage our residents in a conversation about what is it going to take to fill those gaps? Are there public-private partnerships that we can leverage where we can draw in philanthropic dollars into this community that can leverage local dollars? What are the regional resources, the County of Los Angeles, the state resources? So how do we turn over every stone in this community to make sure we're going as far as we can with what we have, and then have a conversation about, okay, that gets us, to X, and we need to get to Y. So now we're ready. And we have, at that point, a vision of where it is that we're headed. It is important that we say we don't have what we need. We have a budget shortfall. That's what's real and true. But that is often not motivating to voters, in my experience. We can't just, it's not motivating. I think about this in my nonprofit. If I approach a donor, I don't say, well, I'm not going to meet payroll unless you donate to our organization. That might be true. And the reason making payroll is important is because we're trying to accomplish a mission here. So always keeping the mission front of mind, both as we do our planning, but also as we talk to each other about this work, that it has to be about, and here's what a balanced budget can bring to Claremont. Here's the community that we're striving for through that balance.
We have what I think will probably be our last question for the evening. This comes from Richard Shute. Hi, Richard. He says, in talking about budgets, many community members remember, some with a degree of anger, what they view as large past mistakes. These include things like the water system takeover, pension issues, an overbuilt city yard. Those mistakes were compounded by missteps with the police station funding and Measure CR. Underlying much of this seems to be a lack of trust in city leadership. How would you go about addressing a lack of trust?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I think trust is so essential to any work we do in community. And having worked in nonprofit my entire career, spent 20 years working in nonprofit, I know even as I was first partnering with government, I had some hesitations. And it took building the relationships and understanding the way our government partners were thinking and the way they worked and how that balanced my own approach and my own thinking. So I believe much of this is about human relationships and us getting to know one another. And honestly, I think much of trust comes from listening. You know, it's as eager as I am to share what I see for Claremont, what I've loved most about this campaign is listening to all of you and hearing from you what your concerns are, what your hopes are, what your dreams are. That's what public service can and should be all about, is about listening and hearing what a community wants and needs and bringing that to life through our programs. So I know that building trust with our city government will be essential. And I think that happens through that listening process, through collaboration, and through making good on our commitments, right? I think about any trust building process when we're in relationship with one another. You trust me more when I say that I'm going to do something, and then I do it. And then the next time I make good on my promise, you know, that each time I make good on my commitments. And when I don't, I come back to you and I say that I haven't. So, you know, I think that holds true at the community level as well, that any of this work comes down to human relationships. And that is my deepest value in life is honoring my relationships and honoring community. So I agree with you that is a challenge and a barrier, and one that I feel well equipped and eager to take on.
Thank you. So everyone, it looks like we are approaching the end of the hour, and I would like to thank you all again very much for joining us. This has been incredibly informative and a lively discussion, and I'd like to thank you, Christine, for your dedication and your willingness to run for a position on the Claremont City Council, particularly in the midst of a pandemic. Sort of the degree of difficulty and complexities is heightened for everybody, and the stakes are a lot higher for all of us. So I really do appreciate you throwing your name in the hat, and particularly offering to bring your skills and your experience to not only our district, but to our city. I know how much you care, and I know how much you're willing to work for the entire city, not just for the district. Do you have any last words for us, Christine?
Yes, thank you so much. And Phalana, thank you for moderating tonight. You are such a graceful and skilled moderator. And thank you to our whole committee that has been tirelessly working on this campaign. Like I've said, this has been the absolute best part of this campaign, has been getting to know all of you, including every single person in this conversation tonight. So thank you for the honor of stepping into this conversation and into this race. I would be so proud to earn your vote. It truly means so much to me when people place their faith in me. I take that very seriously. So just know that I would be a tireless champion for this city that I know and love so well. I am deeply committed to making Claremont the city we know it can be. I would be grateful if you would go to our website. If you are supporting our campaign, I encourage you to go to our website. And if you would endorse officially and put your name onto our website, we'd be very grateful. Let us know if we can bring you a yard sign. If you feel moved to donate to the campaign, we would be very grateful. But more than anything, I would be so honored to have your vote in November. And please know that my virtual door, my actual door, are always open. I really welcome and encourage conversation. If there were any questions we didn't get to tonight, I commit to you that I will follow up with you directly, but please don't hesitate to email, call, knock on our door. We really enjoy visitors. We will keep a distance. But please just let me know what you're thinking and how I can be a support, and it would be my honor to be. So thank you again for coming this evening, and I hope this is the first of many conversations.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your attendance and your attentiveness. We really appreciate your presence, and we look forward to being able to engage with you again on another conversation with Christine. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.